Um,
Hey,
Hi, everyone. My name is Tess Benger.
And I'm Julia McLellan, and we're the co-founders of the Canadian Green Alliance, a national not-for-profit dedicated to bridging the gap between sustainability and theater.
Um, we're coming to you from Tikaronto, which is the Dish with One Spoon territory. And we're very excited to introduce our guest today. A little housekeeping thing during the conversation, please feel free to type any questions into the session chat, not the Q&A. Yes.
Alanna Mitchell is a Canadian journalist, author, and playwright whose writing lives at the intersection of science, art, and society. Alanna's second book, Seasick, The Global Ocean in Crisis, was an international bestseller and was turned into a Dora Award-nominated one-woman play in 2014, which has been performed across Canada and in lots of countries across the world. So that's incredibly exciting.
So welcome, Alanna. Hello.
hi.
We're going to dive right into our questions. We had such an incredible time researching you, and we could ask millions of questions, but we've narrowed it down, and we only have 45 minutes, so we're going to go. So the first one is you have described the ocean becoming warm, breathless, and sour, which is an image that really stuck with us when we were researching you. Can you dive into this description and explain the current state of the ocean and why we absolutely need to be talking about it?
Thank you for asking this question. So yeah, warm, breathless, and sour. You know, what it really means is that there is an effect that the climate, let's say the carbon concentration in the atmosphere is affecting the ocean. And so it's warming it up. So the ocean is like this giant sponge, and it's just this massive, massive volume. So it's absorbing a whole bunch of the heat, like I'm going to say 80% of the heat that is being kept against the body of the planet from all this extra carbon in the atmosphere. It's becoming more acidic. So the ocean is actually chemically changing because it's absorbing this carbon dioxide into along its surface. So it's actually becoming more acidic, and it's also becoming breathless. So parts of it are losing oxygen. So that's where the warm, sour, and breathless comes from. It's a huge issue. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember one of the things you mentioned is that every second breath we take in is, from the ocean, from the plankton in the ocean. And so, yeah,
Right.
it is such a huge part of this puzzle. And I don't think we're talking about it in the same way that we should be.
Well, we're terrestrial, right? We don't think about how the ocean affects things. Even when people talk about the ocean, they tend to talk about, oh, it's 70% of the surface of the planet. But actually, it's like, 99% of the living space on the planet. So
Yeah.
because we're terrestrial, we think that it's just, what we can see around us. But actually, life on the planet is, has the potential to go very, very deep in the ocean and very, very narrow in the atmosphere. So it's just a profoundly important part of the it's the metabolism of the planet, of the production of chemistry of the planet, of controlling climate, of regulating heat, of regulating oxygen. It's just like it just cascades through the whole life support system of the planet.
Yeah. It's such a human thing of us to let our terrestrial being bias the way we see the whole system.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a big leap for us to realize that our emissions, our fossil fuel emissions, and our changing of the landscape were affecting the atmosphere. But to understand that it's affecting not just the atmosphere, but also the whole global ocean is like a whole intellectual leap. It was for me anyway, to try to make that leap was when I was doing the research for this book and the play.
It's, as we all know, and I'm sure everyone on this call knows, that it's really difficult to get people out of their apathy and to be really staring this crisis right down the barrel. And one thing that you say when you're referencing the biologist Tim Flannery in Seasick, you say he has been able to put together an integrated picture of what the science is telling us, explain the implications of that big picture, and then help people hear the story of those implications. And I have to say, Seasick, both the book and the play, really did that for me, because you have such a gift at taking these large scale conundrums and making them very, very accessible to us as human beings. And I'm wondering what you think the role of storytelling is in getting people to pay attention to this crisis.
Mm-hmm. I see it as sort of the one side of a coin. I mean, for me, and this is just the way my mind works, I have to understand the numbers. So actually in the play, the Seasick play, there is this moment almost dead center in the, time-wise in the middle of the play when I actually turn my back on the audience and I start writing the figures on a blackboard. And I do that because for me, unless I understand, the nuts and bolts, the science of it, and I can get it into this very simple term, in my own head, until I can get it into that comprehensible place, I can't figure out how to tell stories about it. So for me, I need to understand the science, and then the part that I like to do is then democratize that. So I like to tell stories that explain what the science is telling us. But just to tell a story without having that scientific background doesn't do it for me intellectually and emotionally. I have to understand what the numbers are telling me, what the scientists are finding. Yeah.
I know that Julie and I would love to hear you talk more about Seasick, the play, and just your journey into writing and performing it. And I just want to say, reading this play was overwhelming.
Why? Why was it?
Well, we had listened to TED Talks and listened to podcasts and read the novel, but there was something about, maybe it's because I was also imagining myself in a theater, which was a bit heartbreaking. But I think the incorporation of, I'm a very musical person, as is Julia, and I think you talk about music a lot in it. And I think thematically it really put me there into the energy of what you were talking about. I'm the opposite. I think I need to buy in with my heart and then understand the science. So it's really interesting to hear you talk about that. But yeah, I think it was a mixture of all of those things, but I'm so curious about the process of how the play came to be. We can't wait to see it one day, and we know we will.
It all comes down to Franco Boni, who was, when I first met him, he was the artistic director at the Theatre Centre in Toronto, and he heard me give a talk. I just tossed off this little talk about the science. I had been doing a lot of public talks about about the book Seasick, and are we glitching here? No,
Okay.
We're not glitching. Okay, cool. So he heard me just toss off this little talk, and he later invited me, and this is, I'm going to say it's 2012, maybe 2013. So the book was still new. He wanted to, she said she can't see me, huh?
We can still see you. Glitched for a moment there, but
okay. I hope there's just a delay, but thanks for letting us know. Anyway, he invited me to a conference of theater makers, of people who were writing plays, playwrights, producers, presenters, in Toronto at the Drake Hotel, and just asked me to give a talk, just tell people. He wanted to inspire people in the audience to do plays about the climate catastrophe, about climate disruption, never imagining that I would end up being one of the people who would do that. But it was funny because I had been giving a lot of talks, and I had decided that I was not going to be funny. I was just going to do it straight. It was a Sunday morning. I remember felt really early in the day and all this kind of stuff. And then I got there, and of course it was this stage, right? And it was all lit because it's theater people, right? So I
have to see you.
Yeah. So I ended up just hamming it up a bit, and it was just more fun than sometimes it could be. And anyway, he got thinking about it, and he said, well, why don't we turn your material into a play? Why don't you do this? And I just, I was just stupid, right? I just said, sure. I had no concept what it would mean. Absolutely not. So then he invited Ravi Jain, another brilliant artistic director, who's now with Why Not Theatre, to work on it with us. And so basically what it meant was that I was at that time really doing a lot of talks about Seasick, the book. And so I would tape all these talks, and I used to play with the stories and try to figure out which stories would work for which audience. And, I would sort of eye the audience like this and think, oh, what is it that they would like to hear from all of these travel journeys? Because I traveled, 13 journeys, 3 years around the world doing the research for this book. So anyway, so we listened to the tapes. Franco mainly listened to the tapes, and we figured out what worked and what didn't work, and which stories we needed to have where. And then we wrote all the connective tissue, and so Ravi and Franco and I just sat in a room for months and months and months and worked on this thing. And they said, oh, we won't have to write it down. We won't have a script. You'll just be telling your stories. And it was
yeah. But it's hearing you talk about that, I want to answer your question in a different way about why it affected me so much. And I think it was because I also imagined theater audiences being in that room, hearing it. And it did feel like, I'm sure you feel with this all the time, and we do too in our work, that we want people to wake up and hook into this work and or hook into this crisis. And I really did feel like at the end of that play, everyone would. Like, it just felt so clear and concise. But it also just hit me right in my heart, and I just want people to experience that play. I think maybe that was the overwhelming feeling, was that I can't wait till you get to do it again.
Yeah, well, hopefully. I mean, we were supposed to be touring all over the world for these last 2 years, and of course, nobody can do that. Yeah.
One of my favorite things that you say in Seasick, which really got my brain moving around in terms of how I look at the crisis. You advocate for the fact that maybe we should rebrand the global climate change to global ocean change, because it's such a colossally huge part of the equation of climate change. What is it, do you think? Is it just like the science was behind, or there was a lack of interest? Like, what is it, do you think, that led us to leaving the ocean out of the conversation for so long?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and partly it was that we didn't know enough. Like, even when Seasick the book came out, which was I think 2010, the science was just beginning to gel. I mean, literally, I was doing all of these journeys with scientists around the world, and I would go from one, and these were like really the top of their game. These are not, they were really fabulous scientists in every case. And I would go from one research expedition to another, one ship to another, and I would say, oh, guess what I just found out? And the new batch of scientists would say, really? That's what you found out? Like, they didn't know what was happening. The picture wasn't clear. It wasn't all, there were all these little pieces of a puzzle, but it hadn't been made into a picture yet. And that's one of the things that I did, that Seasick helped me to do, was to put all these pieces of the picture together. But in the 10 years, in the 11 years since that book came out, there's just been so much more research, so much more knowledge of what's going on, so much, a sense of the cumulative effects of all of these different things on the ocean, and seeing the ocean as a single creature, which is in itself a leap, because scientists have traditionally looked at it as, as this country's EEZ, and it's this country's little sea, and it's this little bay, and it's all. But in fact, if you look at it, it is an organism. It is part of this huge system, and so it was just left out. And I think too, because we are so terrestrial, that we just weren't thinking of it. In my own head, I started to think about. Because explaining climate change or climate disruption is a big game in itself. It's a huge, it's very tough stuff, right, to really understand. But in my own head, I started to think about, climate disruption as the original cancer, and the ocean destruction as the metastasis. That's what I started to think about, because it's the ocean stuff that's really going to kill us.
You use medical metaphors a lot in Seasick, and they're very helpful for me to really digest some large scale information.
That it helped me too. I really, that's why we ended up calling it Seasick in the end. It was called something else for the whole time I was writing it. And then I thought, actually, the medical imagery really helps me understand it. So
yeah, I'm gonna hop off that idea about the ocean being one huge thing, and go to the next question. One of the stories you tell that really impacted us is the one when you swam in the ocean of Madagascar, and it was the first time you felt like you were part of the planet and not an observer. So what would you like to say to folks who still view their relationship to nature in that way, as separate to nature?
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, I'm not much of a preacher, that's, it's, for me, that's not where I go with this. It's more of an invitation. It's more, I think we all do. I mean, I think in every human being I've ever met has some sort of deep connection to some part of nature. We all realize that we are creatures of nature. We all know that we're animals, that we're, and I think people see it in different ways, whether it's seeing a bird, whether it's smelling a flower, whether it's, for me, I mean, my seminal connection with the planet has always been through the prairies, because that's where I grew up, so that's where I really connect. And I didn't like the ocean because I almost drowned when I was a kid. So I had always been kind of like, just don't. And you're right, it was when I was in Madagascar, which was my first really huge journey for, as a journalist, to write about the environment. That was, and I became immersed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, where do you find, because it's really clear when you follow your journey through Seasick and your other writings, you've gone to some pretty incredible places, pretty far, and like there's some dangerous situations that you've been in.
Yeah.
And what was the chicken and what was the egg? Like, where does the drive come to put yourself to those lengths to learn about the climate? Was it a passion and interest in the climate that led you there, or was it the pursuit of a story that then led you to fall in love with writing about the climate?
Ooh, so difficult to know. I mean, how do I know that? For me, it's just this curiosity that's bred in the bone. I mean, I come from a family of scientists, and my mother's an artist. That's one of her paintings behind me, actually.
Oh, beautiful.
I'm in my office in Toronto. So there was, for me, I just need to understand. I need to find out. It's not an option for me. Like I need to understand this stuff. And so I will do whatever it takes to understand that. And in this case, for me, my kind of journalism means bearing witness. So I have to go and see it and smell it and feel it and be in the water and, all that kind of stuff. That's one of the great struggles right now for me as a journalist in the pandemic, because I can't travel. I can't go and bear witness to things. And so I'm having to think of whole new ways of telling stories, whole new ways of, finding out information. It's just like, I'm writing a story. I think I was telling you about this a few days ago, but I'm writing a story about caribou, and I can't smell them, and it's just driving me crazy, because that's what I like to do, right? So.
Oh my gosh, I love it. It's so based in storytelling, which you're speaking to two actors here. We are all about that. So you're making our hearts sing right now.
Yeah.
A lot of the climate conversation is directed towards how much onus is on the individual to make this change and to fix this problem. And we were having a really interesting conversation the other day about this sort of like gift of this case study we now have because of the global lockdowns with the virus. How, most of the global population have been on lockdown for almost 2 years. And we've only really seen a 6% decrease in global greenhouse gas emissions. And we need 7.8 per year for 10 years to reach the Paris Agreement. Right. So we have this sort of gift of this case study of saying, okay, if all the individuals in the world, were to lock down for a little while, it still wouldn't be enough. So with all this knowledge that we have, why is it so hard to leverage government? Like, governments are people too, and they have families, and it can seem like it's such a large leap. But what would your best guess be in terms of how we get these things leveraged into a systemic way?
Yeah. Well, actually, strangely enough, I see it happening now. This is the first time, that I've really seen progress. And I think in some weird way it does relate back to the pandemic, because the pandemic has been horrible, but it's also allowed a pause, and it's also allowed governments to assess spending in a new way. I mean, all of the asks before the pandemic, everything the environmental lobby was asking for to try to address climate change was a small fraction of what governments are already spending now on the pandemic. I mean, it was a tiny, tiny fraction. I mean, nobody would have thought to go to the US and ask for, $6 trillion to, figure out the climate. Nobody would have done that. And so it's just, there's just a different perception about, I think, government's role in some of these things that has been really interesting to track. And somehow that has bled through into, like there were all these, last week was a fascinating week on this file, because, because of the court ruling in the Netherlands with Shell, so all of a sudden Shell has been ordered by the courts, not just to make its own production of oil and gas net zero, but to make it, the burning of it, to reduce the emissions of the product that it produces, which in effect means that it's not supposed to be producing as much. And this will go through the courts for years, but it's a huge shift. That's an institutional response to an institutional problem, and that is where it gets really, really exciting. So why are the courts empowered? Why are the governments feeling empowered? Why are the shareholders? I mean, the other really fascinating one to me, I just couldn't get over this, was the Exxon board meeting last week. Did you hear about this? So there's this little hedge fund called Engine Number One. I love the name, and these guys ended up, they have like 0.02% of the stock, and they ended up going to the shareholders meeting and getting at least 2, if not 4, directors on the board of this. And the mandate of these directors is to make sure that production declines, that they shift into other types of energy. And the reason is not, it's not climate disruption. The reason is that they don't think Exxon can make enough money out of oil and gas to really make it worthwhile for the investors. So these guys are protecting investors by telling Exxon that it has to do its business in a fundamentally different way. Now, again, these are not like definitive things, but they're like, can you imagine that a year and a half ago?
No.
No way. I mean, things have changed. There is movement. There is movement in ways that I've never seen before. It's just fascinating.
Yeah. Do you find that the ocean as the main medium for life is coming into those conversations as well?
No, not at all. Absolutely not. It's absent. I mean, people still don't understand the role that the ocean plays in, as the, well, I think I call it the switch of life in the play. I mean, one of the scientists I spoke to actually told me this, and it blew my mind. I still remember the moment, and it was this, that if everything on Earth, on land, were to die tomorrow, everything in the ocean would be fine. But if everything in the ocean were to die, everything on land would die too.
Oh yeah, we read that.
It's amazing. So that's the power. And so what we're doing with these carbon emissions is actually altering the chemistry of the main life support system on the planet. We're making it less hospitable to life, and it's just like, it just blows your mind. But no, it isn't part of these discussions yet.
Yeah, there's, I'm probably butchering the science, so forgive me, you can, but it was really fascinating to me. Yeah, thank you. It's really fascinating to me that you talk about carbon in the atmosphere being inert when it's in the air. Right. And then when it lays there inert, collecting heat, but when it enters into the ocean, it actually becomes chemically active.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. And so it's really, yes. So it's fascinating that not only do we just, have a separation, with our bias biologically, but there's literally something different happening in the ocean that we aren't even conceiving of.
Mm-hmm. And here's the other thing that's really different. This is the other thing that blows my mind. We can draw down carbon dioxide from the atmosphere through plants. I mean, that's what you do, right? That's how in fact, there's a flux over the course of every year because, depending on which hemisphere is in bloom. So there's a flux in it's very responsive. The proportion, the percentage of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is really responsive to what's happening on land in the plant cycle and in the, in, I guess you could say, in plankton as well. But once it gets into the ocean, that chemical change, that reactivity that you're talking about, carbon dioxide changes into carbonic acid, and that is not changeable. That takes thousands and thousands and thousands of years to remedy. That you literally have to get the weathering of rocks, into the ocean. That's the only mechanism that scientists know of so far to get the chemistry of the ocean back to normal. And that's a process that's much more difficult than just growing plants or, sucking the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis. It's a completely different ballgame that we're talking.
Yeah, certainly a different time frame than what we're referencing in our human lifespan.
Correct.
Yeah. So maybe in part that's part of the reason why we shy away from the conversation of the ocean. Maybe it feels terrifyingly permanent.
Yeah.
Yes, and foreign, right? It's not our medium. Anybody who's been in the ocean and snorkeled or has dived in the ocean knows that it's just not our medium. It takes we have to go to extraordinary lengths to live in the ocean.
Yeah. We have an audience question.
Yes.
As a journalist, can you speak to how Canadian media covers climate?
There has been some incredibly good coverage from mainly independent organizations. So I'm thinking of the Narwhal. I'm thinking of the Narwhal is the one that springs to mind because I've been thinking about it recently. But there've been a whole bunch that have I'm trying to think of another one. The National Observer has done some incredible work. These are all startups that journalists have and activists have started. So it's not that it's absent. It's quite it's getting better and better is the best I can say about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm sure the more that the large companies who are feeling empowered to write about it, empowered and putting the climate crisis into their policies as an organization, I'm sure that will beget more opportunities for journalists to write more stories about it, hopefully.
The major media have,
stances that now allow them to write about climate, which is different from when I worked in daily media, when, you couldn't. I mean, at one point when the Globe and Mail, I was banned from writing about science. Not just climate, but science. So, yeah.
Wait, really?
What?
Because there were shareholders involved that wouldn't.
I have no idea. I don't actually know. I mean, but they just felt that my reporting was inappropriate. So.
Damn. Wow. That's troubling.
It's
it was a long time ago, and they've changed, and they had a whole, some years. I mean, I left there in 2004, so that tells you how long ago that was. But and they've done some really, really fine reporting on the subject since, and they had this whole change of heart. At one point, they just said, "Oh, we realize that we really need to discuss this." To me, it's always been the most important story going. I mean, I think it's really complicated to understand. So you do need some knowledge. You can't just sort of dive in and write about it without understanding it.
Yeah. One thing that I've really noticed about reporting of the climate crisis lately is that it seems like it's much more intersectional now than it used to be as well. So we are collecting stories from different sides of the climate, conversation.
And that's been critical. It's also one of the things that really confuses journalists, and I think it confuses readers in some ways too when it's not done well. And this is not an argument for not doing the intersectionality, because I think that's absolutely critical, and it's a piece that is really, really hard to do. But I see that in theater too. So often when theater deals with climate, it's really actually about poverty, or it's really about inequality, or there are so many, and that's what makes climate such a brilliant topic for theater. I mean, it is all about emotion, and I mean, there is just so much rich storytelling that could be done about it, because there's no part of our life that it doesn't affect, that it doesn't magnify, including things like inequality. Yeah.
In our work at the CGA, we talk about this idea that people don't really believe of climate change until they see it. So the complicated thing about the ocean being such a huge part of this, probably the hugest, is that they can't see it even more. Like they're so, this isn't a question. It's just a thought, and I find it fascinating, and I hope people dive into your work. No pun intended, dive into the ocean. I knew it was going to happen. I tried to avoid it. But I hope people dive into your work, because I learned, I consider myself an environmentalist, and I learned so much. There was so much I didn't know about the ocean. I'm going to head into our last question. Yeah. So we have heard you say humans need to feel despair before they can feel hope. We love that so much. Where do you find hope in this conversation? What discoveries, progress, or people working on this inspire you and make you optimistic?
Wow, that's like about 6 questions.
You have 7 minutes.
Okay, let me just cover that in 7 minutes. You know what I did? I felt tremendous despair. I mean, when I was writing the book Seasick, I went to bed for a month. I just thought, what is the use of this? I couldn't see Spending the Trees on another book. I just, I couldn't see it. And I ended up going on my last journey, which was to the bottom of the ocean in a submersible. And it just changed me. I mean, there's my life before that, and then there's my life after, and they're different. And so it was just an ability to, I remember after I came up, I talked to Roberta Bondar, the astronaut.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And she said that when people are up in space, they have a one of a range of different reactions to being there, and one of them is that it's like they grow another brain and they're able to see things in a different way, and that's what it felt like I did. I just was able to see the world in a different way, and it had to do with time. It had to do with realizing that time is not just linear, and I could somehow see it as an any when things that were happening and I could put what was happening today into this much bigger context, and that helped me tremendously. It was just this tremendous epiphany for me to be there and to feel, personally in such danger, and to rise again. It was a resurrection for me in my life, and so. And I've never been in that place of despair again. I've never been there. I just haven't. What I do, and this is why I'm not much of a preacher. I mean, what I love about our species is that we're really messy. We are really messy and really complicated. And there's all this incredibly good stuff. There's some bad stuff, but there's just all this incredible energy and intellect and brilliance and imagination. I mean, my God, the imagination our species is capable of. And it shows up in the arts. That's where I find my hope. I mean, that's why I do the play, because I don't have to do the play. I could just keep writing journalism and books and that kind of stuff. But I do the play because I think the arts are uniquely powerful to move us, to make us change our spirits and our souls. And I think that matters. I think that is what ultimately changes the systems that we're embedded in. I think that the change within us eventually somehow pushes, it changes. It's transformative, it's alchemical somehow. And I believe in that. And so that's where I get my hope.
Love that. Yeah, a lot of astronauts speak on the fact that once they've seen the Earth from out in space, they do lose their despair. They gain a new form of optimism that was different from one that was available to them before, because you've seen really that we are one system.
One species. Imagine us having a species-wide conversation. We did that with the pandemic, right? We did that with the pandemic because we were the human species against this virus. And so we could, pull together to some degree. I'm not saying that lasted, but it was a moment, and I think that's what happens. Like when we're here on Earth, and we're in our little tribes, of politics and of belief systems, and even sometimes religion. I mean, all these different ways of severing us from each other and saying, well, I'm not going to do something because you're not going to do something. That's what happens at all of these big, these big climate meetings. It's like, well, if China's not going to do it, well, then the US isn't. And it becomes very fractured, and we're not having this conversation as a species and what our species and the other species on the planet need, and so I think you're right. When you go out into space, you must be able to just see it all as one single system. It'd be cool, right? Wouldn't that be cool? Would you do it? Would you go out in space?
No.
It was so funny reading that you were afraid of the water, and then your story about going so far down and then being in the tank, and the story about being in the tank that people can find out on their own time. But we were
go watch the TED Talk.
Go watch the TED Talk. But I'm a pretty claustrophobic person, and I was reading it being like, oh my God, she's going down and she's afraid of water.
Yeah, I mean, I love that you speak to the concept that you had to go because the curiosity would kill you otherwise, like you had to go see it for yourself. And I think that is such a thing that speaks to artists in general. And I encourage any of the artists listening today to put that spirit into your, artwork, is that we make art, and we write, and we do all sorts of artistic pursuits to make people wake up to things. And it only behooves us to wake ourselves up to those things first. And I kind of love that pursuit of curiosity.
It's kind of a shedding, or let's say not a shedding of fear, but a delegitimizing of fear to some degree. Like you just have to just do stuff. And I mean, isn't that what theater is in a way? I mean, isn't that, and art in general, but theater in particular, you have to stand up on stage. I mean, it's horrifying, right?
I don't know. It's been a while.
But we do it because there's something higher. Like it's something about just breaking down that fear. And same with the topics that we choose. Like, why do we do what we do? We somehow are conquering.
Well,
yeah, I think it's worth doing.
We were talking about the ocean being 99%. And I think we were in a meeting that day just talking about other CGA things, but we were like, we are so insignificant and not in a bad way, but when you can see these things as being bigger than you, in a really beautiful way, and see, when you can put the climate crisis away from you and kind of step outside of yourself the way an astronaut would see the world, when you saw the ocean, when you can see it as a huge oneness, I don't know, maybe that helps people hook into becoming active. I don't know, but yeah.
People find their own ways in. That's what I've discovered. I mean, people have just, radically different ways of approaching, of like getting into this issue, and that's one of the things I love about doing the play, is that you always get all these people who just have these incredibly inventive ways of taking the information, taking the emotion, and then just doing something with it, and it's exhilarating. It's just intoxicating when that happens.
Do you find there's a big difference in reaction based on the different types of audiences you speak to? So you've got a scientific audience that you're interacting with often, you've got a journalism audience that you're interacting with often, and then you've got a theater audience. Do you find there's a significant reaction difference?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the theater goers are the audience is in the theater is the by far the most open to the emotion of it, I think, because the play's emotional for me to do, very emotional, and I think it's emotional to hear. And so when you get people who are able to just open themselves up to that, it's different. Journalists and scientists, maybe, I don't know. I've had really, really emotional reactions from scientists too. I mean, one of the very first run was in Toronto of this play, and a scientist came to it, and I was out in the lobby after I did the performance, and I saw this man, a few feet away from me, and he was sobbing, and he came up to me and he said, "Can I hug you?" I said, "Yes." So he came and gave me this huge hug. He was crying freely, and he said to me, "I'm a climate scientist. I came here by accident because my girlfriend is in theater and she wanted me to come to this." And he said, "I've never known how to talk about this stuff before." And he was just able to pierce through all that, the academic jargon, or let's say the code that you use when you're talking to scientists, and feel it, because these people, the thing about scientists is that they do this work for a reason. Like, they are really, really, really emotional in the reasons that they choose to do this stuff, and they plug into all that emotion, and then they have to sort of disguise it in the literature, in the way that they must write in order to get the information across. And if you can pierce that, it's really, really fascinating.
Yeah, it's cathartic, I'm sure, for a lot of folks who feel they have to convey this in the most unbiased and straightforward manner. It's probably quite cathartic to be able to feel very emotive about it.
Yeah, and yet that's what drives them in every case, in every scientist I've ever spoken to. It's there's this incredible, either it's curiosity or passion or something that drives them to try to do the science the best possible way they can. It's really fascinating.
Well, I'm keeping my eye on.
Yes, we must. Where you go? Thank you so much. Obviously, everyone watching can tell we are fangirls of Alanna. So we're just so thrilled to be chatting with you. If you want to find out more about Alanna, you can go to AlannaMitchell.com. You can pick up her books, and hopefully in the future you can check out Seasick the Play, which will be hopefully somewhere around again soon after this all wraps up.
Wrap it up!
But thank you so much. It's been a pleasure and an honor to chat with you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you to the Green Sessions for hosting these important conversations and inviting us. We are the Canadian Green Alliance to be part of today. We will be finishing the day back in the plenary at 5:15, so feel free to join us there. That's everything. Alanna, you're the best.
You guys are the best.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.